Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. It's episode number 18 of Adapting to Change. I'm here with co-host Alan, and we are joined remotely by two guests today. So I'd like to introduce Jack and Shelley to the show. Guys, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having us.
So obviously from the title, you guys will see that we're having a conversation with the Living Wage Foundation today. So Jack, Shelley, if you just want to give us a bit of an overview of your roles and what your involvement with the foundation is. Shelley, we'll start with you.
Yeah, hi. Thanks again for inviting us along today. I'm Shelley. I'm a senior project manager at Living Wage Foundation, and I run our living pension accreditation that I think we'll be talking about a bit today.
Absolutely, yeah. And Jack?
And yeah, nice to see you both. My name's Jack. I'm one of the programme officers at the foundation. So I do our accreditation work in Yorkshire and the Northwest. So I kind of hold the relationship with companies like Adept and others.
Fantastic. So just before we kind of do a bit of a deep dive into what the living pension is, which is the main subject of conversation today, could we just get a little bit of an overview of the foundation itself, like why it was set up, what its history are, and how it's changed in recent years?
Sure. So the Living Wage campaign itself kind of originated in East London in 2001 with some local residents that were organising with Citizens UK, which is now the sort of umbrella organisation that the foundation's part of. But these residents in East London came together to sort of discuss all the different issues that were affecting them in their community, low pay and multiple jobs and overwork and that kind of thing. And what essentially came out of that assembly that they held was that they all didn't get paid enough, essentially. A lot of them were working in Canary Wharf and some of the big banks. A lot of them were sort of racialised workers and women who were doing cleaning work and that kind of job in these banks' offices where CEOs were getting paid, hundreds of times what they were getting paid. And that's kind of what it all boiled down to. So the outcome of that assembly was to launch the Living Wage campaign and to try and set a proper wage rate that people could live on, really. So the campaign went on from 2001, run by Citizens UK, which is a community organising charity. And in 2011, the Living Wage Foundation was set up as a sort of separate part of Citizens UK. And the aim of the foundation really was to run the Living Wage Employer Scheme and the accreditation and kind of do the business-facing work of the Living Wage campaign to get employers to make that public commitment and yes, really to sort of be the voice to business and to try and get them on board. In the last sort of 13 years since then, obviously the campaign's gone from strength to strength. We passed 15,000 living wage employers this year, which is a really important benchmark. Obviously there was the government's national living wage, which was announced in 2016. Yeah, now in sort of in the modern era, we're kind of diversifying and moving towards the living hours scheme and the living pension scheme, and trying to look at other ways that businesses can make commitments to their workers and kind of work towards fair pay and good work, really.
Fantastic. Cool. I mean, that was kind of going to be what my next question was, but you kind of almost in a roundabout way answered it. Is what does the future look like for the foundation? Is that going to be kind of building on the already? It's well entrenched in kind of UK work at the minute. Is the living wage, but is it going to be a case to try and establish more of the hours and the pensions?
It will be, yeah. That's definitely kind of, I think, where the foundation is moving towards. It's kind of activating the network that we've got already. So, as I say, over 15,000 employers, kind of activating those people that we have already and getting them to make other commitments and go further and kind of extending the relationships that we have with businesses into other areas of good work. But obviously, the living wage really kind of remains at the core of all of it. So I think that will definitely be important going forward.
Cool. I mean, I think just as a side note on that, I think the living wage itself is super important. I mean, we tend to find when we're doing procurement of new contracts or tendering for business, that's always seems to come up now, doesn't it? Is what do you pay your staff? Yeah, are you a real living wage employer? Are you a accredited service provider? So yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Jack, there. So moving into the living pensions, when was that actually launched? Because I'll be honest, I'd heard of the living wage and the living hours, but not really heard of the living pensions.
Yeah, so we launched that in 2023. So we're coming up 2 years now, and the aim of it was really to tackle post-work poverty, particularly for those on lower earnings. Just for a bit of background, millions are facing poverty in retirement in the UK. We've currently got 2.1 million pensioners living in poverty at the moment. And research done earlier this year by Independent Age shows that if there's not any long-term solutions to tackle this could increase to 3.9 by 2045. So it's a growing crisis, and we wanted to do something to sort of look beyond work and make sure that people can make ends meet once they stop working, as well as whilst they are working.
Okay, so I mean, generally, as the workplace pension scheme, that's 3% contribution. What's the living pension recommended contributions?
Yeah, so as you touched on, the auto enrolment minimum standards that are set by the government is 8% in total. That's usually of sort of earnings that are classed as band earnings, which is sort of roughly between 6,000 and 50,000 a year. So it doesn't include that first 6,000 of earnings as standard. And of that, 5% comes from the employee and 3% comes from the employer. So with living pension, what we have set as a benchmark is 12%, and that should ideally be based on the first pound earned, and 5% can still come from the employee because that's accounted for in the living wage calculation, but we ask employers to pay 7% as a minimum. They can also meet it as a cash benchmark because we recognise that every percentage cost a lot more, particularly as you go up the earnings scale. So some employers that have accredited with us on living pension, they will use the cash benchmark, which is based on a living wage salary, and is currently just under £3,000 a year, of which around £1,700 comes from the employer, which is equivalent to 12% and 7%.
Okay. What's been the uptake like with that? I mean, you mentioned it was only launched in 2023. I mean, obviously you've got a well-established product in the living wage with thousands of employers bought in on that. What's been the uptake that you've seen with the living pensions?
So we've had a really strong start. We hit over 50 employers in September, which obviously, it's nowhere near 15,000. We've got a long way to go, and that ultimately will be our aspiration, of course. But it's at this stage we're still very much building awareness. So having the opportunity to come and talk to people like you on a podcast like this is brilliant, and just sort of growing the sort of how many people know about it basically and what it is, we're ultimately aiming to, as we've done with living wage and as we've been starting to do with living hours, with employers like yourselves that are accredited in both. It's just raise the floor really and set stretching standards in a similar way that living wage has done for the minimum wage over the last 20 years.
Okay. I mean, what have you seen being kind of big blockers, if you've seen any at all, or is it awareness, or is it kind of like a financial decision that the findings are a blocker with employers at the moment?
So cost is obviously always a big factor. It is quite a big increase for those that are paying using the government minimums at the moment. But also what we do find is a lot of employers have a whole range of different ways that they approach pension savings. So some offer those contributions based on the statutory minimums, as we discussed, but some do say matching 1-to-1. So like if you pay 5%, they pay 5%. And so the solution very much varies depending on the employer and what they're currently doing. We've also, because of things like the pay basis, that sort of 6,000 offset, as I mentioned, and other factors, we have built in phasing for employers to try and help them to phase the cost in over a 3-year period, both for them and if, sometimes for employees if they're making a contribution based on that additional first pound earned. The other blocker for larger organisations sometimes is sort of, as with living wage, you'll know this as an accredited employer and a supplier, they do need to make sure that it's not just for direct employees, it's also for those that are contracted to work for them from other firms. And that's our ultimate aim for living pension, as well as with living hours and living wage. We're early days with that. We have delivered it for some cleaners and caterers and working on a few security workers now as well. but that's obviously a big shift for those industries and for the employers that are accrediting. But those that are committed early on are sort of helping us to work through that now, and hopefully, really deliver impact to those that need it in the long term.
What's the long-term strategy for the foundation with the pension scheme? Do you guys have like numbers that you want to hit, or do you have like kind of forecasts that you're working towards?
Yeah, so we set our target initially at around 0.5% of our network, based on sort of the how it panned out with the living hours accreditation when we first launched that, and we're doing well on that so far. That's within the sort of the first 3 years of launch. We're actually now sort of aiming for a stretch target beyond that of sort of 80 to 100 within 3 years. Ultimately, we'd aim to try and increase that incrementally as we go on, and we're keen now to start to accredit some more larger businesses where the impact will be greater. We have had a lot of success across varying different sectors. There's one or two in most sectors that have, including even hospitality and security, but the majority are in the third sector and in financial services at the moment. So broadening out that reach as well is another key aim for us as well. And then, just as I said, in terms of our long-term aim, it's just to try and do for auto-enrolment minimums what real living wage has done for minimum wage. Over the last 20 years, the Living Wage Foundation with employers like yourselves has championed decent wages, and we just want to make sure we're doing that. But working with employers to support particularly lower paid workers in sort of securing stability in the future as well as now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've been thinking about this for the last couple of days. I mean, it's such an overlooked part of employment, and I think a big onus on that comes down to us as employers to kind of educate people on the importance of having a pension and safeguarding the future. Because I mean, I've spoken to people about it over the years, and a comment that's often thrown out is, "Oh, well, I could be dead by the time my pension comes around. Why do I need to save?" But the flip side of that is you might not be. So yeah, that's kind of why we wanted to have this chat, is just to kind of try and raise awareness. I mean, we have an initiative at work called the Culture Committee, and there was a gentleman who raised a question about pensions in that, and it kind of just piqued my interest as almost kind of short-term thinking. So he was talking about withdrawing from his pension early, and it's like, well, do you understand the ramifications of that? So I think there's a big piece that we should be doing as an employer, and probably more employers should do this, as part of like inductions or things like that. Because what I found is a lot of people opt out at recruitment stages. They get their onboarding paperwork, and it's, would you like to opt in or opt out? Is there a market to make that almost compulsory and to remove that opt out?
Well, that's sort of that's government policy really ultimately, and that's a decision for them. I know they're looking at doing a pensions review. They started off looking at investments at the moment, and they have planned, although not given a firm date on it yet, to look at the adequacy side next year. I know places like Australia have moved more towards compulsion, but I think we're probably quite a way off that yet. But obviously, as you're probably aware, those that do opt out do get re-enrolled every 3 years. And one of the other elements, as well as the contributions within the Living Pension Standard, is that we ask that employers send a communication to all employees every year to just remind them what living pension is, what we're trying to do with it. Their employer has made that commitment to putting more in their pension scheme, and if they have opted out, hopefully prompt them to consider more regularly whether they can afford to go back in. That seems to work quite well. What we've had in terms of feedback from employers so far that have accredited is that communicating it in this way has actually increased engagement, and the confidence of employees around feeling in control of their pension savings has increased as a result as well.
I think a lot of it is around an education piece, because I think young people they don't focus on the future, and maybe it's something in schools and colleges and universities that we need to embed into young people, that this is the future, this is going to matter in future, because I don't think there's anything out there currently, unless you tell me different.
I think there are a few charities that work with schools and things to try and, as you say, educate at a younger age. But because it's not in the curriculum, is it? It's not necessarily that will just depend on local schools' decisions and things like that. But I absolutely agree. Yeah, the more you can educate across all areas of financial sort of literacy, really, and understanding, knowing sort of about sort of debt and just sort of, just all round savings, how it works. And I think the earlier young people can sort of have an understanding of all the basics around that, it really will set them up well. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand why some people opt out of the pension scheme, because they think that couple of £100, I need that in my wage.
Absolutely.
But my counter argument is always, once it's gone the first month, you forget about it. No. You don't see it, you just see it as a line on your payslip. I don't know if it's something, maybe something we'll pick up offline, but one thing I did years ago at a previous company, this was around union enrollment, was a union rep would come out with me and we'd go visit sites and we'd tell them the benefits of being within a trade union. I think that was with G&B at the time. I don't know if there's a market for us to maybe partner up and get someone out with us to come and speak to our staff, just to, it's all well and good us going to do it, but you guys are subject matter experts. We could get you into our staff who maybe have opted out and try and encourage them to get back in. I don't know, we can take that offline, but if that's something the foundation would be open to, I hand on heart, I'd come out with you guys and I'd do that, certainly. And I know you would as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about pensions all day, every day, so it's probably a case of getting me to stop talking about it. But we've worked with some of the organisations that have accredited, and there's one of our accredited employers actually is the Money Charity, and they do that sort of stuff. That's what they do. They go out, they work with employers to sort of provide overall, sort of much more focused on employees. And so, definitely it'd be good to chat to you about that. And also just to add, finally, I guess, we do recognise, and there's been a lot of work around kind of balancing short-term and long-term financial resilience. And, people do have to make decisions in the here and now, but some employers have been able to, offer some other aspect where they maybe allow temporary withdrawals and continue to make contributions. And, all of that flexibility we very much encourage from employers that are willing and able to do it. But it's not like a requirement of the accreditation. So sort of putting the contributions alongside any education that employers are able to support with is definitely a great way to approach it.
100%. So how would a company go about gaining accreditation to the pensions? What does that journey kind of look like?
So I think it's probably fair to say we try and keep the actual process for accreditation fairly simple and not too difficult to go through. The initial step really would just be a call with our team, just to sort of talk about an employer's pension scheme and see where they're at currently. So as Shelley said, there are several different models that employers might use, matching 5% or auto enrolment minimums, and then from that point we can sort of discuss what work might be needed to meet the living pension standard, so to get up to that 12% total contributions. And after that point, really, it depends on where an employer's at and how much work it would take to get the pension scheme changed. Some people can accredit straight away if they're already meeting that 12%, and the accreditation process can take a week or 2 weeks, and it can be really simple. Or for a really big firm that doesn't meet that standard, they can take a year or two maybe to get up to that point, and it depends on their own internal processes and whether the board has to approve it, that kind of thing. But from our point of view, the actual process of accrediting is fairly light touch, and we like to keep it quite accessible for people, really.
Cool. I imagine that'd be a bit of a blocker for a lot of people, because you'd imagine something like this would have reams and reams of paperwork to work through and meetings and all that sort of stuff. So that's reassuring to know that it's relatively straightforward. And I'm guessing someone like yourself, Jack, would almost hold the hand of an organisation through that process to make sure that they're getting those checks and balances right.
Yeah, exactly. And we're always willing to talk to employers throughout the journey that they go through to get up to the living pension standard. And we're happy to, talk to people on multiple occasions and provide some support with them and communications and templates and that kind of thing. So we do try to support people through the actual change as well.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other questions I was going to ask was what do the kind of costs look like? But we've kind of you've covered that off, Shelley. Really, we've kind of the percentage points and the percentage marker. So if there are different companies who are kind of watching this or listening to this, they'll be able to make those calculations for themselves. The living pensions is something that we've talked about quite a number of times actually, off camera, and we've mentioned it on the podcast a few times about our wish to enrol. And I think we've kind of not parked it, but we've kind of put the brakes on it a little bit following the autumn statement, because obviously national insurance is going up. The living wage is obviously going up, and the national living wage is going up. I mean, obviously we only pay the living wage, so the minimum wage doesn't make too much of a difference to us. But it's kind of standing still. We're looking at well over £100,000 that we, as an organisation, need to find to fill that shortfall on the increase in wages and the increase in national insurance. Have you guys seen or noticed any other companies kind of similar to us that have maybe just slowed down a little bit, or maybe they've kind of walked away from the process altogether in the last couple of months?
So yeah, we've definitely seen a number of employers sort of pause like yourselves and take stock. Because obviously that the autumn statement did the increase in employer national insurance and the costs that are associated with that. We understand completely that that is going to require some looking at in terms of looking at the numbers, and we did see a bit of a slowdown in terms of our inquiries around October, November as a result of that, sort of in anticipation, and then afterwards. But actually, we've seen a real bounce back in the last month, and actually we've credited 5 employers this month, which has been a really successful month, and
fantastic.
Got a lot of conversations in the pipeline for sort of coming up. Often January is a time that people like to launch new things and stuff. So we're hoping to see a few more early next year. But it's still, there's definitely a lot of employers that are also saying that they do want to do it. They are committed to the idea, but they're just going to have to look at maybe doing it over a slightly longer time frame. And even before the autumn statement, talk to a lot of employers that are saying, we want to implement this, but we're going to do it in phases, and we work with them over what that looks like, and sort of can provide materials and resources to help with mapping that out as much as possible, and also doing communications around that with our employees around that gradual increase.
That's reassuring to know actually that you can stage it and phase it through. It doesn't have to be one big hit. That's probably a little clip that we'll get out there. I'm sure that's probably put a lot of people off thinking we've got to do this big one hit in one go.
Definitely.
And definitely for us as well. But I know Nick's committed to to the living wage. I mean, he sits on the leadership board of the Living Wage Foundation now, so I know that he is committed to trying to do this. So again, maybe something for Nick to pick up offline on how we maybe phase this in. But yeah, that's good to know. So thank you for that. Do you know, or do we have any data on? You touched on pension poverty at the start of the chat, and some figures around how many people are kind of suffering now and what that's projected to move to. But do you have any ideas on how many people are not currently in the workplace pension scheme or anything like that?
Yeah, so there's sort of government published figures on this every year, and the current, I think the last set they published was for 2023, because obviously there's always a little bit of a lag in terms of reporting. It showed that 80%, which is just over 22 million of all workers in Great Britain, are in a pension scheme. So by that, so about 20% are not, which is, I think, a lot better than they anticipated. So just as a comparison, back in 2012, that at that point there were 47%. So it's been a massive increase as a result of this enrolment.
I mean, I'm quite surprised at those numbers. I thought it'd be more around the 30-40% of people who weren't. So that's reassuring to know that people are opting in. So you're probably looking at maybe a 1 in 5 also that aren't. Do we know how many companies there are, that have got the Real Living Pensions accreditation as of now?
So it's 54 is the latest number, I believe. Shelley can correct me if I'm wrong. But
54.
yeah, definitely a big increase in the last month or so. I think Shelley mentioned earlier, I think we've had about 5 in the last few weeks, which is really good to see.
And do those companies have the hours and the wages accreditation as well?
So all of them will have the wages accreditation because that's sort of a prerequisite for the pension one. So it's kind of like a following on from that. Not all of them will have the hours one, and I think the number we've got is 12 employers have all 3 of them at the same time, which is really good. So it would be great to see Adept as the 13th at some point.
Are there any security or cleaning companies that have got all 3 at the minute, or would we be the first?
I'm actually not sure off the top of my head. I think there may be 1 or 2. I can double check that for you.
Okay, because if there aren't, that'll give Nick a little nudge,
Yeah.
a little nudge of enthusiasm to do it for sure. A scenario I'd like to run by you is someone, maybe use myself as an example. So I'm 36. If I'd opted out of the workplace pension scheme, I'm actually opted into the workplace pension scheme, but if I'd have opted out and never opt back in up until the point of retirement, what would retirement look like for me?
So, I mean, every individual circumstance is different. So you can't really give a full answer to that. You need to look at all the different things like, how much that person's been paying in, how long they've been paying it in for, and, what their individual costs are. But, inevitably, if you stop at 36, even if you've been paying since you were, say, 22, which is when people are generally auto-enrolled under legislation, that's going to be 14 years of saving. And the living pension calculation assumes that people start saving in their 20s and continue to save up to state pension age, which is currently 66, but we're assuming, because based on previous government announcements, that it's likely to end up at around 68. So that's what it's based on currently, which is, getting on for 35 years. It's also worth noting that to get a full state pension, and living pension assumes that this is saving on top of a state pension. You'd need to be contributing enough national insurance for 35 years in order to meet that. So, so I can't give a sort of, you'd have to look at individual circumstances, but you're going to be falling quite short of what would be needed as a sort of minimum level to meet what's been calculated needed for the sort of cost of living.
Yeah.
I mean, would it be helpful if I just quickly outline what the calculation takes into account as well? So the calculation is done by Resolution Foundation, who also calculate the real living wage each year, as you're probably aware. And they looked at, if you wanted to create the equivalent at retirement age, what income would people need on top of a state pension to provide them with an adequate standard of living throughout the rest of their lives, and that was averaged across 6 different sort of profiles of people, and it looks at if you're in a relationship, so you're sharing the cost as a couple, or if you're single, and then it looks also at whether you own your own home, whether you're renting in the private sector or you're renting in the social housing sector, and that kind of across those 6 different variables, it comes up with an average, which is around £19,000 a year in current sort of today's terms, and so that the additional part is then needed on top of the state pension, which currently is around £11,500 a year, and then they work the savings back from there. So again, just to give you a sense that it is taking an average across different circumstances, and each individual, we would very much encourage people to look at their own circumstances as well. And a great place that people can do that is the Money Helper website. If you just type in Money Helper pension calculator, it's like a government-backed projection tool that can help people to look at their own circumstances as well.
Okay, so did you say the current state pension's just over £11,000 a year?
Yeah, it's just under 11.5 at the moment. Yeah, and it'll go up again in April.
So any auto enrolment pension would be on top of that?
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I suppose the answer to the scenario would be, if you're not in an auto-enroll pension, auto-enroll. Completely understand why you're touching on those figures, Jack, about and Shelley, about pension poverty. Given those numbers, you can completely understand why with the current cost of living. Is there a whistleblowing service for, say we became aware that a company was a recognised service provider and they weren't adhering to what you guys set out? Is there a way that can be reported so that you guys can investigate that?
So we do have a whistleblowing sort of process for employees, living wage employees, if they think there might be an issue with sort of complying with the living wage or with hours or pensions. So through our website, you can make an inquiry, and that will come through to sort of whoever the relationship lead is for your area. And these are treated entirely confidentially, obviously, so we don't pass any information on to the employer or anything. It doesn't tend to be like a massive issue. We don't have a lot of it happening. I don't think. I think that's fair to say. And generally, these tend to be sort of cases that we can resolve quite cooperatively with the employer. It's not very often that it's they're just not complying on purpose and trying to get away with it. It's usually a bit of an oversight, and we try and work with employers to resolve it, and quite often we do.
Have you ever had to suspend anyone's accreditation off the back of anything like that?
It probably has happened in the past, but no, it's not something that I would want to comment on currently.
Cool. I mean, Shelley, Jack, is there anything else that you'd like to kind of put out to our audience before we let you go?
Nothing from me. I don't know about you, Shelley.
No, it's just been really great to talk to you about today. Thanks again for the opportunity. If anyone listening is interested in any of the 3 accreditations, just really encourage them to go on our website and put an inquiry for them. We'd love to chat to them.
Cool. No, that's great. I mean, we'll pop a link in the video description and the audio description for your guys' website and how they can get in touch if they want to start that journey or if they've got any questions about where they are now. But again, just a big thank you from us for coming on and talking to us about that. I think, there's maybe something we can pick up offline. I think the main takeaway for me is an education piece for us to get out to our employees and colleagues of the importance of doing something like this and safeguarding your future. So we'll definitely be in touch about that. But again, just a big thank you for coming and giving us your time to talk to us about this. It is very much appreciated. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Cool. And that's a wrap. So we'll see you guys next time.